Hey everybody, in this episode we are going to jump into Mongoose schemas so we can start defining our data. As soon as we define our data, we can then start interacting with our data, and then we'll have a full stack application. So we're very close. Like I said, we're going to be talking about Mongoose schemas, so let's define what those are, because we'll also be talking about Mongoose models. And they are pretty interrelated. So a Mongoose schema, the best way to separate this is really think blueprint. You're thinking, what data does my app need? Maybe this is a social media application. So I'm going to have users, what property does every user need? Maybe a username, a password, a profile. Maybe they can make posts. So a post is another type of data we can create. What does every post need? Maybe a title or a description. So we need to define these blueprints broadly so we can encapsulate everything that we may need for a post or for a user or whatever data we have. Now, a model can be defined with a name. So a model is given a name, and then it's told to reference a specific blueprint for what it represents. So I would make a model named to-do that references the to-do schema to know what it's to be built from. So models are used to perform the CRUD operations on data created with that model. So we use the model to create new pieces of data, and we also use that model to go and look at the database to find things that match it. So when we're talking about folder structure over here, we have one more folder to add. So far, we have this as our backend from node modules down to the server here, and client is the front end. So one more folder I'm going to need to make on the backend is one called models. Now, we learned servers in the backwards way of how we'd actually have you build it once you know databases. Typically, you want to define your data first. So you go in here and you create your models. What is my data? And then you go into routes and define how do I interact with that data. So we're kind of going to go backwards in this because we've already defined how to interact with this fake data. But we're going to get rid of this. We don't want this anymore. We want it in MongoDB. So let's define a model. We're going to define our movie model, and it needs to account for at least a title, a genre, and again, the database will give it an ID. So this is all we're going to need to give it for now. So if I go into model, I'm just going to make a file called movie.js. In this file, I'll need Mongoose, so let's require that. Now Mongoose also has a property called schema that I'm just going to pull out here, so capital S schema. So I don't have to say mongoose.schema every time I want to use it. Okay, so that's what we need. Now we can create our schema. We can create our movie blueprint. All right, so let's declare a variable. We'll say const movie schema equals, and then we're going to instantiate this constructor. So a brand new schema. So it takes parentheses, and we pass in an object. This object is the blueprint. What we put in here is saying everything that's created as a movie must follow this blueprint. So every movie we have is going to have a title. So we'll say title : and let's say what data type will a title be? It will be a string. And this is the format we're going to have to follow. We're going to give it a key. Every movie has a title, and then it's going to be followed by a value that represents the data type that value will be saved as. So again, the next one we have genre, and that would also be a string in this case. Now let's add a little bit more just to get some practice with this. Let's say we also had a release year. I'm not going to actually know these, but we can put it in here for practice. That would be a number. And we have all the other data types. So we have Boolean, we have array, we have object. We can use all of those. And in fact, each of these properties can be expanded on to have more features or more customization. So let's talk about that a little bit here. Right now, what I'm saying is this movie will have these three properties, but it doesn't have to. Technically, I could send the database an empty object and it would still try to save it. So I definitely want to make sure titles are required. I don't want anything saved in my database as a movie that doesn't have a title. So instead of just saying title string here, I can open up object brackets to configure title. So now instead of saying title string, I'm going to say title has a type of string, and that's how I say what data type it is. But now I can add more properties like required is true. And this is very nice. This is what's reinforcing that data consistency. If they try to save a movie in my database without a title, it's not going to happen. They're going to get an error message back saying title is required. So we might as well do that to the rest of these just for practice again. So type string required true, and release year, a number. We can leave that optional. Now, one side note here, there are a bunch of other properties we can add to this, such as lowercase true, uppercase true, unique true, so you can never have two things with the same name. There are all sorts of properties, so you can always go to Mongoose's documentation on schemas, and they'll show you all of the properties you can possibly state for a given key in a schema. So definitely check that out. There are a lot of options in there. All right, now that we have our schema built, our very basic schema, but one nonetheless, we now need to generate the model from this schema. So that is what we'll actually export from this file. We're going to say module.exports equals a Mongoose model, so mongoose.model, and that's a method. And this method needs two things: a name, what is the name of your model, and a schema, what blueprint does it follow. So we're going to name this uppercase movie and tell it to use the movie schema. And there we go. We have our first model created and our first schema. So why are we exporting this? Well, in the next couple lessons, we'll look into the movie router, where we're going to need to reference this movie model. We'll pull it into here. So instead of just sending the static data, we can say, hey, go find all movies in MongoDB. Since we are already connected to MongoDB on our server, that will connect just fine, and we are really ready to go now. So go ahead and get your schema or schemas built with whatever you're working on. If it's this example, great. If you're working on an assignment like Bounty Hunter or your own personal project, get this implemented, go build your schemas. And in the next lesson, we will talk about post and get. We'll start creating data with this model, and we'll start getting data. So we'll see you there.